that the Ghana president did say something about, he did a speech about, you know, Africa needs to stop begging and start doing things for themselves and stop begging from these outsiders. And we all know. So last week, the Biden administration met with the African leaders for a U.S. African Summit. It has been a long time coming. The last U.S. African Summit was in 2014 with the Obama administration, and you already know that the Trump administration was not hosting or was not going to be hosting a U.S. African Summit. So this is definitely a long time coming. If you were following the U.S. African Summit, you know everything that pretty much took place, all of the meetings that took place, all of the promises that took place as far as the U.S. And so in this video, I'm just going to be talking about 4 takeaways that I pretty much got from the U.S. African Summit. And if this is something that definitely is going to be beneficial, it's going to be beneficial for the African continent, or is it something that the African continent really does need to think hard on as far as getting financially involved with the U.S. So the first takeaway that I got from this is that, to me, it still kind of gave me like the modern colonialism type of vibe. I think the U.S. still kind of took this in type of a colonialistic type of mentality as far as the summit was held in Washington, D.C. I was wondering why it wasn't held in at least an African country. Surely there was an African country that could have hosted this summit, but it was held, of course, in Washington, D.C. So the leaders actually had to come over to the United States for this summit, instead of the Biden administration going over to an African country to host the summit. Joe Biden did about a 17-minute speech as far as everything that the U.S. was promising for the African continent. The U.S. is planning on giving $55 billion over the next 3 years to the African continent. And again, that still kind of felt kind of colonialistic to me, because it really is kind of a blanket amount for an entire continent when we know that the U.S. has given countries way more than that. And I'm talking about a country, not really a continent. In this $55 billion, of course, Joe Biden did map out where the money is going as far as technology, infrastructure, youth leadership programs, entrepreneurship. So, you know, he did, you know, they did kind of break down where this money is going. But to me, I think it would have been much more beneficial if the Biden administration would have individually met with these leaders to know exactly what these countries are needing, instead of just looking again at Africa as a country instead of a continent, and really knowing that these countries individually might need something different, instead of just thinking, oh, it's the African continent, so of course y'all going to need A, B, C, and D, when there might be a country that might not need as much of infrastructure as another country would, or, you know, there's a lot of still individualistic types of needs that are going on in these African countries, and it still feels like the U.S. was kind of looking at Africa as a country and instead of a continent. And then in a three-year span, that's still a little sketchy for me as far as what all the U.S. could do for the African country if they wanted to, as far as really coming together as an equal partnership, not really aiding Africa, which is what they always seem like they want to do, is aid, but to really come together as equal partners to work together for the betterment of the African continent. So it still definitely gave me kind of a modern colonialism type of vibe as far as how this whole kind of U.S. African Summit kind of came together. The second takeaway is that Biden tried his best to not make it about China. He kind of skirted around that issue when we all know that the real reason why this summit was taking place is because China definitely has a strong hold right now in the African continent. You definitely see a strong presence of China in a lot of African countries. When I go to Ghana, there is definitely a strong Chinese presence there. There is a section in Kumasi that's actually like a little Chinatown. You can go to Ghana and Chinese people are making the native native food. You can get Chinese food. I mean, there's a lot of Chinese presence there. You go to the mall, you know, there are a lot of stores there, or you know, several stores that are owned by Chinese or owned by Asians. So you definitely see the presence there in Ghana, and I know that you see the presence there in other African countries as well. And that to me is not a very good thing. You definitely don't want to get to the point where the Asians' presence are more than the natives there, because you know, like Hawaii, when you go to Hawaii, a lot of people don't realize what native Hawaiians actually look like compared to the Asians that have migrated there and have of course made their home there. The native Hawaiians definitely do not look Asian, and so you don't want to have that type of you know, thing going on in these African countries as well, as far as you going there and you seeing more of an Asian presence than you see of an African presence. And so of course the United States see all this happening. They do see that there is a very strong alliance between China and Africa. They know that Africa right now is booming. I mean, we are seeing Africa pretty much everywhere with the music, the culture, the fashion. I mean, Africa is doing it. And you know, Africa's always done it actually. It's just now people are just now starting to realize that, but Africa has always been doing it. As you know, so you know, it's just that now people are actually seeing all the great things that Africa has to offer. And of course, United States, it wants a piece of that pie. We know that a lot of natural resources are coming from the African continent. And I know a lot of people look at the African continent and think of it as a poor continent. And as far as the infrastructure, as far as just the economy, as far as a lot of things that go on in these individual countries, yes, these countries should be a lot more developed than they are, considering the richness that the African continent actually has, as far as gold, diamonds, chocolate. They also have natural resources that are attributed to a lot of electronics that the United States uses and other countries uses as well. So we do see and we do know the natural richness that comes into the African continent, and these countries want to have a piece of that pie, and the United States is no different. They know that if they continue to not build some type of relationship with the African continent, they will lose it, and they're going to lose the money. Of course, we all know that it's always about money, and it's always about power, and it's always about control. And the African continent needs to continue to remember that. So even though the United States did not really mention the real reason why they were having this summit, which is to really try to outbid China and try to make it be known, hey, we are giving you much more than China was giving you, and so you definitely need to you know, have a strong alliance with us. We all know the reality of the reason, you know, the underlying reasons for this summit. There's a lot of underlying ulterior motives going on underneath there, but the United States did a pretty good job at kind of hiding that fact and really focusing on the plan and the strategy that they have in place and the promises that they have for the African continent and for the African people to move this continent forward. The third takeaway that I got from this is that the United States, or this summit, definitely was focusing on the future of the youth. And I think that is very, very, very important to really focus on the young generation, especially in the African continent, because they are the ones that's ultimately going to start to initiate the change, and they're going to carry on the change. They are able to see what the older generations did. They are able to see the mistakes that were done, and they are, you know, are able to not repeat those mistakes. They are also, of course, going to be the ones that's going to continue to innovate, and they're going to continue to change, you know, everything that's going on in Africa to make it definitely a more competitive nation. And so it's definitely good to invest in the younger generation so that they will have that education in order to continue to grow this continent to its potential, to its height. So I do like the fact that that was a part of that initiative, was to definitely put more into the young generation of the African continent in order for them to be educated and continue to be educated so that they can help the continent grow as much as possible. The fourth takeaway that I got is that a lot of the people in Africa are definitely a little leery about this whole situation. I think as they should be. I think there have been many times that the U.S. has promised these things and not really pulled through. And a lot of people in the African continent are really wanting these African leaders really to not even, you know, accept this aid from the United States of America, because that is what it is. It is aid. And a lot of people in Africa are saying, you know, we're tired of the handouts. We're tired of you all feeling like we need you to help us when we really need to start helping ourselves. The African leaders do need to come together and start doing what's necessary to help the African continent and stop, of course, relying on these outside forces. And the president of Rwanda, he said a couple of months ago, I believe, and he was talking about how the African leaders definitely need to stop waiting for outside forces to make them come together. They should want together for the betterment of this continent, and they should not always wait on Europe or wait on the United States of America to gather them all together to talk about the African continent's problems, as if they need these other, you know, continents to come in and basically put in their 2 cents on a continent that they don't even live on. They don't know what's going on. They have a very biased you know, outlook, a very negative outlook, a very superior outlook as well. They have a very superior mentality, as if they're better than the African continent. And since that's the case, I think that it is important for the African leaders to start getting together to decide what is the best interest for the African continent, instead of, you know, seeking out this aid and seeking out this help from Europe and from Asia and from the United States of America, and realizing that, you know, we can stand on our own, and we will stand on our own. And I think the African leaders gradually change. There is gradual change in some of the African countries. I think some of the leaders are gradually seeing it. I think that they still have a long way to go as far as getting the African continent where it should be, because we all know that the African continent can reach to be a competitor amongst these nations as well. Again, with as many natural resources as it has, there's no reason why it can't, you know, it cannot be in the competitive field. Now, the United States did talk about the African Union being part of the G20 because right now I think it's just South Africa. And so they want, of course, more African voices to be included in this. And I don't really know why it's taken this long for them to realize that there should be more African voices. You know, it's almost like people forget that the African continent exists. And it's just like, okay, hey, we're out here. We are the second largest continent in the world. Our population is by far, you know, surpasses everybody. And so it's just like, since that's the case, yes, we should be sitting at these tables. We should be giving our voices and let the voices be heard in the African continent. And it's a little sad that it's taking the Biden administration, you know, the United States of America has to be the one to say, yes, I give you permission to be a part of this, when it should just be a given that they should be a part of it. There's not something that should be, you know, even discussed. That should be something that, yes, this is something that we definitely need to hear from the African continent. So all in all, I do feel like the African continent and the African leaders really need to think about this as far as taking money from the United States of America, because we know what comes from that. You're going to be indebted. They're going to expect something from you. They're going to continue to have a hold on the continent, of course, because you become indebted to them. And I think that is something that the African leaders need to remember, that every time you are taking money from these countries, every time you're taking money from these continents, then of course you're going to be indebted to those people, and you're going to be indebted to that country, and then they are going to in turn feel like they have power over you. And they really do have power over you, because you owe them something. You owe them money. And I think the African people really want the African leaders to really listen to the people and say, hey, you know, we really need to start figuring these things out on our own and doing what's necessary. With as much natural resources on this country as we have, we should be able to have some type of leverage as far as if you want these natural resources from us, you're going to have to give us something tangible. You're going to have, you know, it's going to have to be a quid pro quo as far as what they do to the African continent. And you know, that's something that can be done. I mean, a lot of these countries would not be able to do as well as they are able to do without the resources coming from the African continent. And of course, you know, that's just something that just needs to be understood, and that's the leverage that these African leaders definitely need to start putting in place as far as, you know, hey, you know, you want these natural resources, you want these resources from us, okay, well, hey, let's sit down and talk about it. This is what we're going to have to do. But I do want to say that the Ghana president did say something about, he did a speech about, you know, Africa needs to stop begging and start doing things for themselves and stop begging from these outsiders. And we all know that Ghana right now is, you know, the debt that's going on, and you know, the president, of course, actually was, you know, asking for money from the International Monetary Fund. So, you know, we all know that, you know, he's seeking money as we speak. I think a lot of the people from Ghana were talking about, you know, that definitely should not be something that he should be saying. But I think he's talking about as a whole, as all of the African continent, as the African countries, you know, we need to stop, you know, the begging needs to stop as far as, you know, we need this, we need that, we need this, when we really need to start, you know, the African countries really need to start standing on their own 2 feet. And I have to say this because I'm African American, that, you know, the same problems that the African continent is facing as far as standing on their own 2 feet is definitely something that the Black community also is facing as far as trying to stand on our own 2 feet and stop trying to wait for people to help us and save us and try to get us out of, you know, the situations and the dyers that, you know, that we're in. We also have to learn to stand on our own and do things on our own and stop waiting for somebody to save us. And I think that's what the Ghanaian president, the Ghanaian president was trying to say, is that we definitely, you know, the African countries need to stop waiting for somebody to save. They need to stop waiting for these summits to happen. They need to start taking the initiative to get these things rolling, to come together and realize as a united front, with unity is where things are definitely going to change. All right, you all, that's my take on the U.S. African. So yeah, that's my take on the U.S. African Summit. You know, I do hope that something good comes out from it. I do hope that eventually there will be ties, you know, a little bit of alliance between the U.S. and the African continent. I do feel like it's a long time coming. I am going to do a video later about, you know, the U.S. Apologizing for slavery. That's a whole different video that I think I might have to discuss, because that definitely is something that rubbed the African Americans a little wrong. But that will be in a future video, but that is a video that I definitely feel like I have to do. All right, you all, I am Michelle Mazelleغ. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.